Alright. We're on a bit more of a delay than it seems, but that's okay. Because that thing's still there. Alright. Alright, we're going to start the recording now. Alright. Good morning and happy Sabbath, church family. We are beginning another kind of newer conversation about Elijah, which Simeon finds rather funny, but at the same time, it's a very interesting topic, and it seems like it might even be an interesting point of discussion for us to go through the people we were named after and kind of find some significance.
Maybe that's what we can do a study of next week, is the significance of names.
Well, that'd be cool too. And we'll definitely pick up on that through this here. I just want to share that the other day, Debbie had popped on and requested that we pray for our mom and dad before we get kicked off that way. Or not kicked off, before we kick off. And that we just pray for them and for their healing and recovery. But we'll also take a moment to see if anybody has any other prayer requests that they would like to submit. Just while we're waiting on those, because there is a delay in the stream, we will maybe share a few testimonies here and there. Sam, do you have anything you'd like to share? Testimony-wise, is anything interesting been going on or happening?
Nothing super interesting at the moment. Just kind of been lazing around this week. Other than, I guess, Jehovah's Witnesses came to the door today.
Oh?
Yeah. So I was talking to them. I didn't talk to them, but other than that, we had a conversation about Jehovah's Witnesses being kind of wacky.
Well, this is somewhat of an appropriate topic because the name Elijah means Jehovah is God.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting correlation there. I'm trying to think too, because I've been so busy here this past week that I can honestly say I haven't been up to much other than just like building and getting things ready for the new gym we're setting up in Roanoke. But in terms of some stuff that's interesting, there are little things here and there that popped up, like kind of a spiritual conversation started to spark with the lady who wants to teach aerial silks at our gym. And she started just kind of randomly talking about her beliefs and how she felt like she was just so judged going to any other churches and things like that. So that's an interesting conversation starter there, and that might lead to something more spiritually promising down the road. Some other interesting things, as Dad always likes to share when he's doing things as well, is little snippets from the news. And it's been big in the news here lately that the U.S. had an airstrike on a very significant Iranian general, and I think they were all the news highlights just keep saying that Iran swears that they will retaliate on the U.S. for doing that, which is interesting because it kind of goes right in line with the direction of prophecy. We got wars and rumors of wars. But it seems like things are starting to get pretty intense, and only the next couple of years will tell what's going to be in it for us. But we know that God has it under control, and that He has left us prophecy and all these things to study that we might be comforted and be able to be confident in those times as well. Especially with the Old Testament stories, which is another reason I felt pretty good about doing the story of Elijah. Is his life, even though only certain parts of it are recorded, is very interesting and intense and relevant for us in the end.
It's like an emotional roller coaster.
It is.
It's so funny.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
He's a man at one second, and then he's not a man the other.
Is that Elza?
I imagine so. I can't see the car, but yeah.
Great. Well, then we'll wait for them to get up here, and we'll pray once they're up here.
Huge.
But yeah, the story of Elijah is is like Simeon said, it's almost like an emotional roller coaster. It's very up and down and all over the place. And
David, I think, has the best emotional roller coaster story out of anybody.
Yeah. Are your parents coming?
Yeah.
Oh, hey Eric.
Little gremlin.
Little gremlin. Yeah, Elsa and her family just got back from church just up the road here, so they'll be joining us for today's study. We're going to learn about me.
Okay.
Yeah. And we were just talking about little news highlights and little blurbs like that.
Yeah, no, there's always something kind of prophetic, I feel like, happening all the time. Like a lot of people didn't even realize the 70 years between Israel becoming, or Jerusalem becoming like recognized as Israel's capital again, and that was 70 years since it had happened previously, or since I think they were taken over, or something, or like since they lost their capital.
Well, you know, there's a point from a person I've been watching, Tom Stapleton, up in Canada. You know who he is.
I met him.
I'm referencing for anybody who's watching online who
Okay.
doesn't know. But he's been doing a lot of different prophetic presentations on Daniel and Revelation, and I've just been watching a whole bunch of them. And he's pretty much been talking about that very same thing as well, about prophecies being fulfilled. But what he was saying, he's got a book, I think he's the one who, called The Temple Deception, where he talks about this idea that we think that God is going to restore Jerusalem, and a lot of people think that he's going to bring in his 1,000 years of peace through Jerusalem, and what the book is talking about is basically that he's setting things up for the great deception, where he's going to come and, as Dad would say, personate Christ, and actually have that all set up for that. And so what he was saying was that there might be prophecies in the Bible that were conditional, or that had a specific application that Satan might actually try to replicate or make it look like it's fulfilling again. And it was an interesting theory that the devil might actually go out of his way to fulfill prophecy to really sell his point.
Yeah, to try and convince people that like Jerusalem is going to become
Restored.
Restored.
And that it'll be the seat of the millennium.
So you think that maybe he's going to try to see if he can make Jerusalem the superpower?
That's what Tom indicates in his talks and stuff like that, is he believes that the Antichrist power will ultimately set themselves up in Jerusalem.
And try to see if they can make that the capital and have
Yeah.
Jesus walking around.
Yeah, and that he'll actually do what they have been prophesying he would do from the start, which is walk through that main gate. And, we know that there will be false signs, like a false resurrection and stuff, so I think maybe he'll walk through that graveyard and people will see him to resurrect, and he might parade them through just like they prophesy and like they have the tradition of believing.
Yeah. Playing into the
So-
traditions would be honestly a really smart thing. That's a smart thing to do, at least to deceive people, is play into the tradition.
Oh yeah.
Especially if you could make it happen and you had that kind of power. What's interesting is I'm wondering why it hasn't started sooner.
Well, everything has to work out on a specific timeline, and that's one of the things. I mean, this isn't supposed to be a whole presentation about Tom Stapleton and
Yeah,
his
I was
talks.
about to ask you what we're talking about.
We're talking about prophecy, and I was just mostly talking until your parents got up here, and then we could have prayer together.
Oh, okay.
So, just kind of sharing stuff that I've been looking at.
Gotcha.
But so with Tom's presentation, he pretty much believes that everything is working on a sanctuary calendar. And so he's basically saying that all these things have appointed times. Wait, Mike, you can come in.
Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath. Good to see you. Is Carlos here too? Oh, okay, he's just taking his time. It's right here.
Pointing at this way.
Yeah, it's just facing us. You don't need to worry about it, Mom.
You don't sit right there.
But you can have a
Yeah,
seat
Gary.
there, and we were going to wait for you guys so we could have prayer together, and then we were going to break into the topic. Go ahead. Oh, wherever you want to sit is fine. Alright, so now what we'll do, you guys are here, we'll go ahead and have prayer, and then we'll start our study time. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for the Sabbath and for all the blessings you've given us. We are here enjoying a wonderful day and some comfort in our home. Thank you for family and for friends and for those who are able to tune online and to watch and to join us at this time. We ask a blessing for all who join us for this study, that we all might be able to contribute and share the knowledge that the Holy Spirit has given us. and that you would inspire us to speak your words and to know your wisdom. And while we're thinking of it, we also want to pray for our family, for my dad's foot, and for my mom's as well, that you would help both of them to heal up and recover okay. And for all those others who we are unaware of, who are dealing with different problems and ailments, that you would provide comfort and healing for them, and that you would show us what we need to do to be your people in these last days, to bring comfort and joy to each other. We thank you and we love you, and we ask these things in the name of your Son who died for us.
Amen.
Cool. So today we're talking about the story of Elijah. Just ironic, right?
That's what you said it was about you.
Yeah, that's why I said it was about me. It's not actually about me. It's about who I'm named after. We'll be studying in the book of 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 17. And what I've done today, we'll kind of fiddle with it and see how it works, is I've actually programmed the computer to have the Bible app on so you guys can read along as well if you don't have your Bibles with you. I imagine you do, but we'll probably play with that just in case, just to see. So 1 Kings chapter 17 begins with the story of Elijah. We'll read the first couple of verses and then kind of go back and start talking about each section of the story. So I'll start us off with the first part, verses 1 through 7. And Elijah the Tishbite, who was one of the inhabitants of Gilead, said unto Ahab, As the Lord God of Israel liveth, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word. And the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, Get thee hence, and turn thee eastward, and hide thyself by the brook Cherith, that is before Jordan. And it shall be that thou shalt drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed thee there. So he went and did according unto the word of the Lord, for he went and dwelt by the brook Cherith that is before Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and flesh in the morning, and bread and flesh in the evening, and he drank of the brook. And it came to pass after a while that the brook dried up, because there had been no rain in the land. So, discussing some interesting points.
I guess the brook drying up was the God's way of saying, get out of here, it's time to move.
Well, also, the context of this whole situation, right? So the preceding chapters, before all this, is kind of a lineage of kings that are wicked and good and bad and etc. Most, I guess, were wicked. But it goes through of the death of the last king, Omri, and then goes to Ahab, where it started to introduce us to this. And Elijah kind of jumps onto the scene out of nowhere. Like, there's no before mentioning of him, and there's really not much after mentioning of him other than from Christ.
His taking him.
Yeah, other than referencing back to him and what he did, or his mission, or his purpose, which I find pretty fascinating. So in this situation, King Ahab, which is known, if I'm not mistaken, as the most wicked king of Israel, and which is really saying something.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I believe that's his title. Is he's classed as being the most wicked king of Israel. And so what's going on in this time and place is a time period of intense idolatry. So everybody is worshiping.
I think
Baal.
that's the reason Elijah had to come onto the scene pretty aggressively.
Well, I think that's part of it. With the context of what's going on, this is years and years of Israel going back and forth, ultimately just being steeped in idolatry, particularly thanks to Ahab's marriage to Jezebel. And there's a lot of interesting context or stuff around that as well.
I imagine Elijah was like a nomad.
That's kind of what it is because the Bible actually does not mention, there's no other mention of Tishri where he's from.
Yeah.
So there's no biblical mention of this place that he comes from other than here's the region that Elijah comes from.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a nothing place, rough, lots of hills, kind of a nomadic place like Simeon's talking about.
Especially because he didn't have a house. He was being fed by ravens.
In this situation, yes. I mean, he may have had a home at one point.
Yeah.
We don't know. I mean, he just appears out of nowhere and is very zealous for God. Some people aren't even sure if he was even at all Jewish, let's say. There was a couple different theories that he could have even been from the line of Ishmael, which would be an interesting thing. But more people think it's more likely that he is from one of the tribes, because one of the regions, or one of the parts of the three of the tribes actually had a claim in that property out where it says he's from. So it's either way, it's just an interesting little standpoint. So at this point, we see the way God works normally is he does things to try and call people to repentance. And all throughout Deuteronomy and the Old Testament, there's pretty much this standard of God saying, look, if you obey, I can protect you and bless you. If you're disobedient, then you're going to receive these curses. But we understand them being an effort to bring Israel back. And so judgments come when we do not heed the call of repentance. And so in this situation, we have Israel being so far gone that God saw fit to go ahead and pass a judgment, which was a drought, basically creating a famine. And here's where Elijah's coming into the scene. He's someone who must have, before this time, been passionate for God or known God or come to a relationship with God. And he's given the command to go to Ahab, the king of Israel, and to tell him that there will be no rain or even dew it says nor rain these years, but according to my word. So, in the verse 2 there, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, Get thee hence and turn thee eastward, and hide thyself by the brook Cherith, that is before Jordan. And it shall be that thou shalt drink of the brook that I have commanded, and the ravens to feed thee there, or I have commanded the ravens to feed thee there. So why did he have to flee to the brook Cherith? It's an open question.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just no context for what he was doing out there.
Well, so this is when he's talking to Ahab. So he goes to the king.
Oh, and Yahweh said unto Ahab,
Said unto Ahab, As the Lord God of Israel liveth, before whom I stand, there shall not dew nor rain. There shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word. And then God tells him to get himself, to leave and go eastward and hide himself by the brook Cherith. So why would he need to flee? Why would he need to go hide himself?
Because they would be after him, because he was the one that was causing the drought.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can imagine, you walk up to one of the most powerful people around, and you basically proclaim a curse on him. As a king, he could have you killed right there on the spot, so I'm sure in the shock of the moment, things were kind of crazy, but then Elijah just leaves. There's nothing that says there was any conflict or stir, but he leaves, and he's instructed to go and hide himself. Now, some interesting stuff that I was looking at was if Sim, did you look at what the words meant, like Cherith?
Mm-mm.
Pretty cool. So it comes from the first word there, which is by the brook, right? By the brook. So this is a specific thing. And there's just some interesting things that go along with this. By the brook Cherith. Cherith means something that is cut in half. Or it can also mean to cut in half to bargain or barter or to make a covenant. Which is a very interesting point as well. And the word for brook, in addition to meaning like a stream, also means a place that covers. Right? So in a really interesting way, this is an early thing. Like if you read my dad's book, yeah.
Yeah, I saw.
Okay, yeah, 'cause I asked because this information is mostly relevant for that. Otherwise, it just sounds like I'm saying nothing at all.
No, no, yes, I
But- But so what's really cool is that in a symbolic form, when he says to go hide himself by, could actually also be translated to hide yourself under. So it's a really interesting way of like symbolically or spiritually pointing to this idea of Elijah hiding himself under the covenant, or covering himself with the covenant, just by the locations, telling him to go to the brook Cherith in the very words. So it's very interesting. Let me see, where was I here? Okay.
And not only that, but he's drinking of the brook.
Yeah. Yeah, so he's literally there, but also there's this element of God separating him from everything for this period of time as well. Right? And then that kind of bridges us into our next point, going from verse 4 there. And it shall be that thou shalt drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed thee there. Now, what's so interesting about that?
He's being fed by birds.
Well, that too. I mean, there's obviously a lot interesting about it.
Why ravens?
Why ravens? It's a good question. Yeah. I'm not. The farthest that I can understand is that in Hebrew culture, a raven is an unclean bird. So the idea that the Lord would use an unclean animal to bring him food, when he could have chosen any clean animal to do that, or he could have just given him manna.
An eagle.
Have you heard that the bird brought the food from the king's table?
I've heard that, but I don't know where we get that from.
Who made the
Because
bread?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, God could make the bread
and
too.
prepare the meat.
Because, I mean, angels made bread for Elijah at different times as well. So I don't know if they were like in heaven and they were just throwing it down and having birds catch it. And I don't know what the situation was. I have heard that the birds were coming from the king's place and bringing him food.
But that's a good
Wait,
question.
wasn't he into the
Why
desert?
God chose this kind of bird? It's,
Yeah. Well, what's kind of interesting too is the raven, if I'm not mistaken, is well, first it's a scavenger. It's like a vulture, which is why it's considered unclean. But also, it's considered in many cultures as being like a bird of death.
Mm-hmm.
You know, representing death.
Yeah, especially in Hollywood and in symbolic terms.
They, I've never been.
It's a blackbird.
They bring bad luck.
Bad luck. Yeah. Yeah, but in this case, it's the
Look,
exact
because of the
opposite.
scavenger.
This bird is bringing him life.
Yes, yes.
They do ravens?
Um,
Wait, wasn't
It's
Elijah
just
into the desert?
superstitious.
Oh yeah.
Wait, wasn't Elijah into the desert?
In this case, he was by a river, basically, a small creek, like at our property.
Oh, okay.
He was living somewhere out in the Jordan
No, before
desert.
Oh, so, wait,
Where
are
are we?
ravens in the desert?
I guess they're in that region.
Oh, okay.
I mean, like ravens are all around. They're just scavenger birds.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's an interesting question too. Is if they're even local to that area. That would be interesting to look at too. I hadn't considered that. But with that, like, why do you think he would use an unclean bird to feed Elijah for? I mean, it doesn't say how long he was there, but he was there until the brook dried up, which could have been a year, 2 years. It depends on really how strong the brook was to begin with. We don't know, so I guess it doesn't do much good to speculate, but it must have been some time that he was regularly fed twice a day from birds, from ravens specifically.
Was the meat even cooked?
What now?
Was the meat even cooked at all?
So the word for meat, I'll have to look at it because I didn't
Apparently
actually
the-
look at it.
Apparently, the Greeks believed that ravens were messengers from the gods.
Hmm.
That's apparently what the Greeks believed. They were messengers to the mortal world.
And Mom shared, she said, and that she shared one earlier, part 2. Let me make sure I got that. Okay. She said, and she shared again, hang on. She said, I heard a preacher say that the raven flew into the king's house and snatched food to take it back to Elijah. That's what you were saying. I've heard a preacher say that too, but I've never read that. And she said, and that the raven would imitate what it heard people say and would chatter, "Where is Elijah? Where is Elijah?" when he flew in, because that's what he heard the king and his people saying over and over. But it was interesting that in a time of famine, the Lord used the raven to feed Elijah from the table of the king who sought to kill him. Yeah. And like I said, I honestly don't know where we got the idea that the ravens were getting the food from the
They
king.
apparently also
It would stand to reason, I think.
they mainly travel in packs of 3 apparently too.
Ravens?
Apparently they're a pack of 3. That's typically how they fly.
Looking up raven patterns.
Yeah, even.
Yes, I mean, they're an interesting bird, but I think it also had a very significant teaching lesson for Elijah at this time, based around what he did after this. So where did he go after this? After the brook dried up, God told him to go somewhere else. Yeah, Sarepta, which was in King James it calls it Zarephath. But what's interesting about that place is that's actually the region where Jezebel is from, and it's a Gentile region. It's not Hebrew at all. So what I'm getting from it is almost that it is God teaching Elijah the same thing he taught, I think it was Peter, in Acts chapter 10, where he shows him the vision of the sheet with all the unclean animals and tells him to eat.
God has his people in everywhere.
Yeah.
I think he is teaching Elijah that he has good people in Sarepta, the Gentile city.
Yeah.
I wonder what led up to Elijah's life that led up to him having this much trust in God just to walk up to the king and proclaim that hey, you're gonna not have any water for a long time and you're gonna starve.
Well, when we read about the testimony of other prophets like Jeremiah or other people, and they talk about the passion that the Lord had given them for the message they had to share.
Yeah.
They describe it as it was like their bones were on fire within them, and they couldn't be quiet. They couldn't contain it. I think it's possible that at this time Elijah was just somebody who had cultivated a relationship with God, and just as all the other prophets after him had felt that zeal and that passion and that push where he couldn't sit still and just let Israel continue to fall into idolatry. I mean, it was dramatic enough to the point where Elijah thinks he's the only one. Which is pretty interesting. But so with the miracle of the birds feeding him twice a day at least, and him being there, I think it was also a good opportunity for him to cultivate his relationship with God, and to really just like how Moses was taken out of Egypt for 40 years. I think this is a condensed version. Huh?
To unlearn?
Maybe not to unlearn, but mostly to strengthen.
I think it's just a trust thing.
Yeah, I mean, exercising trust for that long. So finishing up in that verse there, in verse 5. So he went and did according unto the word of the Lord, for he went and dwelt by the brook Cherith, that is before Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and flesh in the morning, and bread and flesh in the evening. And he drank of the brook. And it came to pass after that the brook dried up, because there had been no rain in the land. And we'll go on to the next part there. The only other interesting thing that I did want to draw out of this is the spiritual parallel that we have about bread being the Word of God, which would be interesting to look at how that applies when you have an unclean source bringing you the Word. But also is the interesting point that he gives Elijah a specific place to receive this bread. And he says, I've commanded the ravens to give you bread there. Not anywhere else in the world. It didn't really give Elijah a choice of where to go. It was like, go here, and here's where you'll receive what I'm promising you.
Cherith.
By the brook Cherith.
Does it say what kind of meat he got?
So the word for meat in the Bible is...
It's kind of interchangeable for
It's
food.
interchangeable for just the word food. It's
Yeah.
like Old English, and used to say meat. Like in Genesis, the Bible says that God gave us every tree yielding fruit for meat. Right? And so it's just an expression saying
just-
this
this
is
is like a lot of
food.
food.
Meat is just food.
Okay.
You know.
At least in Old English.
I don't know if they actually brought him physical meat. It could have. It says bread and meat, so I don't know if that means some bread and some vegetables, or some bread and some fruit, or whatever it was.
Most of the time they would say flesh if they were talking about meat.
Which you did read. You said flesh.
Let's see.
Bread and flesh.
Nice. Well,
Yeah, very good.
maybe it is some chicken or something. I don't know.
But like,
Yeah, so I mean, it would make sense that he would be taking from the king or something possibly. That kind of is a reasonable thing.
Well, this is kind of an interesting point too. I think another reason that it was a raven, just from a logical standpoint, is that it would have been some of the main creatures that would have survived a famine, because
Yeah.
they would be eating everything that died.
Elijah.
So that could be the other reason.
So, how far away was the kingdom to where Elijah was at?
Also a good question. I think it was something.
If it was like a few days, and like if it was like some fresh meat or some like freshly baked bread, then it could like spoil on the way there.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think it was something within 8 or 10 miles. I think from what I read.
10
Kilometers.
kilometers. Yeah, 10 kilometers from Sidon.
Oh, it was 10 kilometers.
Kilometers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So like
So kilometers. It's only a couple miles then, isn't it? Or I forget. Are kilometers bigger than miles?
No, they're smaller.
No.
No, they're smaller. Like 10 kilometers, I guess.
6.2 miles.
Yeah.
6 miles.
So it'd be
Yeah.
speed of a raven.
be similar to like you guys live a little further from us than 6 miles, but it's close, similar distance. So that's about how far birds were flying, carrying food for him.
Oh, okay.
That's
But
not
well, I
bad.
mean, if they were bringing it from him.
Plus, I don't think God will let the food spoil. You know, it could be weeks.
Oh yeah, I mean he can preserve it.
Yeah.
And Mom said, I think the king's house was probably one of the only places that had food during the famine. And so that could be why the ravens were able to continually bring it. So that, that's logical.
Also, if like, since like the ravens can survive a famine because it eats off the dead things, can it just bring like fresh meat from like the cattle and stuff like that? Well, it still would be like raw, but like if the food from the kingdom right now.
Well, so usually when things starve, they lose most of their muscle, and they're pretty bad at that point. So if something starves to death, it usually doesn't have any actual real food in it enough.
Oh, okay.
Because when you starve, your body eats itself.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, it wouldn't be healthy to eat something that died like that.
Yeah.
So that's the main reason
Well,
it wasn't
meat's not even
bringing
healthy
him.
to eat when you kill it right. So
Yeah, so that's those are interesting questions, bud. Keep them coming. So going from there, the famine finally reaches Elijah enough to the point in verse 7 there that the brook dries up. And what's interesting is that the Lord tends to work this way in that he doesn't give us all the information at one time. Like he didn't tell him, okay, go speak to Ahab, then go to the brook, and then go here and there. He gave it to him as he needed it.
Yeah, like while it was happening.
Yeah, he goes from Ahab and he says, okay, now go to the
I think that
brook.
also speaks to what you should be focusing on as well.
Is the here and now instead of...
Yeah, well, it's that, because also it's like when you give somebody, especially like a mortal brain, when you give us like something to do, if you told somebody to plan out their entire day right now and then follow it to a T, probably wouldn't do everything that you planned out. Like maybe if you had like big chunks of things and you're just like 3 things, that might work. But if you were like, hey, you need to wake up, put on a shirt, you need to brush your teeth, and you need to plan out your entire day right now, that'd be a lot of information for people to think about.
Oh, sure. And Mom shared that brings us back to the story of Elijah when the Lord told him to go and hide himself by the brook Cherith on the east side of the Jordan. He also promised to send ravens to feed him. I have no doubt that the prophet was exactly thrilled with that promise, or was not exactly thrilled with that promise. It's hard enough to have to hide yourself in a desolate region. Far worse was the news that he would be fed twice a day by unclean birds. The whole thing was unusual because ravens normally care only for their own. Under no circumstances would they bring food to a man, much less twice a day. And then she also had shared that once God had declared the ravens unclean, no Jew would have anything to do with them. They were not to be eaten under any circumstances, and given their scavengering nature, that prohibition was actually a blessing to the Jews. Prevent disease and things like that.
So from Jerusalem to Sarepta, whatever, I don't know how to pronounce that.
Also, it's
It's
probably
303 miles.
Not what now?
303 miles.
Mhm.
Jerusalem to Sarepta.
It's 10 miles
Wait.
from Sidon. But
You said
Jerusalem-
303?
3 miles.
Yeah, miles.
Really?
Yeah, that's what Google says.
from what to the to
Oh,
the
is that are you like is that like a Google Travel thing, or is that like, what is that? I don't know what that. Well, I only asked because he wasn't coming from Jerusalem specifically. He was coming from the Jordan when he went.
Yeah.
And I mean, what I had read online was that I mean, it's still a long journey, but going into the next portion here, was something like at least 80 miles, but they're not exactly sure where the Brook Cherith was,
Okay, from
so it
Jordan.
could be more or less, but
From Jordan would be like 4.8 miles.
4.8.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was near the Brook Cherith, which is more southern from Jordan, specifically on the east side of the Jordan. But anyways, when I was looking it up, it says something like 80 miles, so still a very long journey.
Yeah.
If you were doing a real constant I mean, plus think of the fact that, you know, this is during a famine, so you're crossing a desert with minimal water, and I don't know if the birds fed him all along the way, or if he just had to fast for several days while he crossed.
Well, he had one meal and sustained him for 40 days, so I don't think
That
it'd
was
be
from an
unreasonable.
angel.
Yeah, that was a little different, but I mean, that's later. I think also the ravens are probably a symbol to Elijah to learn that even Gentiles can have the truth as well, like carrying the bread.
That's what we were saying earlier,
Yeah.
was that this was pretty much the same thing that Peter was given in teaching Elijah that he can interact with an unclean thing, or that what he deems unclean is not actually unclean, that if God says this is not a problem, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
So doesn't Elijah have to be like careful what he says around the bird to like actually give up his location since he goes to the kingdom?
I don't imagine he's talking to the birds too much. And then he's going really crazy. That water's really not getting to
I
him.
mean, yeah, but, well, you know, here's the thing, is when you have God, you're never actually alone. You know, so in terms of what he was probably doing, if he was completely alone the whole time, then it's possible that he just spent most of his time in prayer. And he talked to God and waited for answers. You know, as for talking to the birds, not to say that he didn't, but ravens don't, I mean, what she shared earlier isn't like listed in the Bible. It doesn't say that the ravens came and were repeating things, but they are kind of mockingbirds.
Mm-hmm.
So they will like repeat other birds and things like that that they hear. So not to say that it's impossible, but it's just not
It's not listed. It's not.
It's not mentioned.
I just want to know if like he could accidentally give up his location to the king or something.
Even if he.
I mean, I think if he left, he could have. You know, because we're going to read here in a minute what Ahab did while Elijah was hiding. And we'll read that in a second. I'm going to read this comment from Mom. She said, "He sent ravens to Elijah twice a day, in the morning and again in the evening. The ravens didn't bring enough on Monday to last the whole week. They brought enough in the morning to last the day, and enough at night to keep him nourished during the night. Just enough and nothing more. This is Jesus. This is what Jesus meant when he taught us to pray, 'Give us this day our daily bread.' God is teaching us in the Old Testament the same thing. He is trying to teach us in the New Testament. He is willing to supply our needs, but only on a day-to-day basis." Which is where he says, "Your bread and your water shall be sure."
Does it say raven or ravens?
Ravens.
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 Yeah, ravens, plural.
They usually
So-
travel in packs of 3.
A flock of them. I mean, it's unlikely he was feasting. I mean, like she said, it was enough that he had to eat again later. And every
eat twice a
day.
day.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like he was eating so much he could have just retired or something. It must have just been enough to keep him alive and moving.
Also, a raven's not that big, so they wouldn't carry
Actually,
huge.
so ravens are pretty big. Mom was saying they have like a 50-foot wingspan, or 50 foot,
50-foot
50-inch
wingspan.
wingspan. That's a big raven.
That raven's well beyond pre-flood.
Hauling some bread.
Dude, that raven's like the size of like a jet.
Yeah. No, yeah, 50-inch wingspan. They're a bit bigger than a crow.
Yeah,
So, what was your question, Harry?
So
but
when
they're still only like
No,
this.
it's bigger than that. 50-inch
50 inch.
50-inch wingspan.
Well, that's their wings, but their body is like
Well, sure, but they're still pretty big. Like, they're like from here to my...
what wings are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they can carry...
Well, that's what I mean. Like their
simple
head is
stuff.
not that big. It's just like they're not carrying that much food. Is what I'm trying to convey. They're not going to be
Oh,
carrying
I
like
gotcha,
an
yeah.
entire like
Maybe
Cow.
not bigger back then.
There's a desert raven, they're bigger. Eric, what was your question, bud?
So, when the river dried up and he had to go to that place, I forgot what it's called, but like, yeah, when he had to go there, what's like, did he have any water source while going there, like any form of water?
I don't know. I mean, he could have been walking along the Jordan. I mean,
Um,
that's what I would imagine.
but didn't
is
it dry up? And like, how long did it take him to get there? Because the human body can take about like 4 days until it dies without water.
That's probably about how long it could have taken him to get there.
it takes 7 to 8 days that water.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, he could have just been staying along some riverside. Maybe he had something
Maybe he
saved.
had something to, save the water and
Yeah.
then drink on his own.
I mean, God always
Provides.
well, not only that, he provides, but I find that he often encourages us to make appropriate preparation for something.
Yes.
And so it's like
And that
normally,
tends
I
to be-
mean, because Elijah could have seen that the
Okay.
brook was drying up.
So he could have like saved up some water, maybe.
Yeah, he could have had like a leather pouch or something like they would have used in that time to hold water or something to make the trip.
What about the ravens? Couldn't they like bring a like
Ugh.
like couldn't they like bring a gauntlet from the king and just like go to a nearby river and fill it up and bring it to Elijah?
I mean, God can make anything happen.
Yeah, but like when it dried up, when you had to go
Ele encheu o
travel.
cantil dele, pegava o cantil para viajar pro deserto. E aí ele levou.
Okay.
Hmm. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, those are interesting questions, bud, and they're good to think about. You know, because God can make any of that happen any way He chooses, but He chooses specific ways often for a specific reason.
I just want to fill in the blanks.
Sure, yeah, and I mean that's normal to do, and I think in the situation, if Elijah didn't have a way to store water, either God provided other sources along the way, or maybe Elijah literally just did a complete fast of everything while he made the trip up.
Não, too far. Wasn't
7 days.
About 80 miles, at least, approximately. I mean, yeah, you could do that in 2 or 3 days if that's all you have to do is walk. You know, you just keep walking.
If you ran.
Sure, and Elijah's a pretty good runner too, as we find out later
Did
as
he
well.
sleep at
Yeah.
all during those times?
Probably.
So he could have made the trip in be an ultra marathoner.
Wait, did he sleep at all during like
I'm sure he
the trip?
I'm sure. Yeah, in fact, he reports he slept later. He was so tired from all the not sleeping. Perhaps that's when he chose to sleep. But so going on from verse 8 there. After the brook dried up, there was still no rain. It had been some time. Doesn't say how long. It says, the word of the Lord came unto him, Elijah, saying, Arise. So there he is. He's lying down. Tells him to get up. Verse 9. We're on verse 9. 1 Kings 17, verse 9. Arise, get thee to Zarephath, which your mom called Sarepta, and that's the other name for it, is Sarepta. Because in the Bible you had different things, like you had like the Arabic side, let's say, and the Jewish side, and they would call things different names. And so I think the Arabics called it Sarepta, and the Jews called it Zarephath. So it's the same place, though. Arise, get thee to Zarephath, which belongs to Zidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow woman there to sustain thee. So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, the widow woman was there gathering of sticks. And he called to her and said, Fetch me, I pray thee, a little water in a vessel, that I may drink. So at this point, he's incredibly thirsty. So maybe he didn't have any.
Or he just ran out like midway or something.
Sure. I mean, maybe God only gave him enough to make it there, and then only enough to make it to where he had to be. You know, but sometimes that's the way the Lord works. Says, where am I at?
11.
Okay. And as she was going to fetch it, he called to her and said, Bring me, I pray thee, a morsel of bread in thine hand. And she said, As the Lord thy God liveth, I have not a cake, but I have a handful of meal, or flour, in a barrel, and a little oil in a cruse. It's like a cup, like a vessel. And behold, I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and dress it for me and my son.
Mine says 2 sticks.
Yeah, it says, well, the word is interchangeable for a couple,
Yeah.
2. It is interesting to note, and we can discuss that, why it would say 2 sticks specifically. Like, are you going to be able to bake bread using only 2 sticks? You know, unless they're really big sticks. Yeah, really big 2 sticks. So we can look at that in a moment. And I think there's an interesting reason why that could also be relevant, which we'll see if we get to discuss. That I may go in and dress it for me and my son, that we may eat it and die. And Elijah said unto her, Fear not, go and do as thou hast said, but make me thereof a little cake first, and bring it unto me, and after make for thee and for thy son. For thus saith the Lord of Israel, The barrel of meal or flour shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth. And she went and did according to the saying of Elijah, and she and he and her house did eat many days. And the barrel of meal wasted not, neither did the cruse of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord which he spake to Elijah.
Wait, so was like the drought like a worldwide thing or not?
It was at least
At
local
least Israel.
to Israel.
Oh,
Israel
but at
also is
least-
pretty prone to
like
droughts
you read
and stuff.
something about like do what I've said and it's gonna be
Sendeth rain upon the earth.
yeah. So
I mean, I don't know. It could have been a global drought, but it's more so they use a lot of expressions like that. For example, if all you knew was Israel, that would be the earth to you. That would be the world. Doesn't mean that it's not the case. It could have been a global drought too, but it was at least local to Israel for a lot of important reasons, because God said that if you walk away from me, if you worship other idols, I'm going to take away the greenness of your land. I'm going to cause it to stop raining. Basically said all these things are going to happen if you turn to idols.
so the place Elijah's at currently, is that part of Israel or not?
It is close by, sort of.
So
It is the northern part. Like, so Israel, if I'm not mistaken, is like down here on the map, and he's like up in here somewhere.
so
It's in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Shouldn't the place he's at have rained then? So, because like you said, it would be local to Israel.
Well, Israel encompassing just the region in general.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, maybe I didn't say it correctly. But just that area, the whole big area, hundreds of miles there, was having a big drought.
Okay.
And it says it's because God said, I'm not going to let it rain. I'm not even going to let mist or dew. You know how you walk outside in the morning and the grass is wet? God said you won't even have that until Elijah says so.
Yeah, the Middle East is pretty prone to droughts and different stuff as well, anyways, because it's a very dry and kind of deserty place, very rocky and very sandy.
Well, especially now.
But yeah,
But certain regions used to be very lush and very green because God had blessed them originally. But then when they walked away from him, he took away those blessings that he had given them. Because he promised them in the Old Testament, he said, as long as you follow and obey and worship me, you'll be blessed and you'll have all these things. Your gardens won't fail. You'll always have food and everything will be awesome for you. But if you walk away, then these things come away too. So looking at this story, we talked a little bit about the distance. It's a good long hike from the brook Cherith to Zarephath. But what's cool is also looking at those words, which I think also have relevance for us as well. The word Zarephath, it's a name that means refinement or refiners. So it was probably a place that did a lot of refining, where they would burn and purify metal, so you could get like really shiny silver, that kind of stuff. Which is a very interesting place as well, but it also mentions that it belongs to Zidon, which is a word that means a fishery or a place for capturing fish, which has a lot of interesting stuff too, because when Jesus came to the disciples and he told them he would make them fishers of men, meaning, to catch people, to bring people in for salvation.
Put people in.
To catch them for salvation.
So, you kind of have this
And where to find them.
process. You kind of have this process with Elijah where in the beginning he's hidden under the brook Cherith, let's say, and under the covenant. And then he goes to the refiners, but it's also a place to catch fish, fishery. So it has a lot of interesting spiritual parallels to our spiritual relationship with God as well, of going through that refining process and then becoming fishers of men.
And what about like the raven thing you talked about, like how Raven was filthy and like he was bringing the bread, which was like the word of God and stuff like that, to Elijah and stuff. So isn't that has like anything to do with why God chose the ravens?
I think so.
Because like
So here's the thing is, right, so do you understand the difference between Jews and Gentiles? Okay. So the Jews, right, let's say Israel is God's chosen people, that's us, right? And the Gentiles are the people who are against God, who aren't with God.
okay, so pretty much opposites from each other.
Yeah, and so anyone who doesn't believe in God is spiritually
That's how it was
a
in their time.
Gentile.
at least.
I mean, that's that way today. You are
I guess so.
spiritually a Gentile if you are not on God's side. And you are spiritually Israel
I mean,
if you are on God's
Technically,
side.
by Israel's standards, we are Gentiles because we're not Jewish. Technically.
Yeah. So if you're looking at it from a physical standpoint,
Yeah.
the Jews say that anyone who is not Jewish is a Gentile.
That was their distinction in the day.
And a
But
Gentile-
that also meant son of God and not son of God.
And a Gentile means you're unclean. Like, they weren't even allowed to, like, touch you, basically, because you're not Jewish. Because they were afraid it would corrupt them. So birds are in that same category of being unclean. Certain birds are in that category of being unclean. And so if you wanted to make a connection between the two, then you could look at that as being prophetic of the time when God said that the message would go to the Gentiles to take to the whole world. Because now you have this unclean bird, which would be like a Gentile, taking the word of God to others.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're pretty sizable.
And ironically feeding Israel.
It's a good point.
You know. So yeah, so I think there's something to be said there.
Just mom sent me that.
Oh, a picture of a person holding a raven.
Yeah.
So-
Pretty sizable. They're
Yeah,
the size of a red-tailed hawk.
Yeah, it's a pretty big little bird there.
So it does have like, it is pretty much a reference to like the raven and the bread.
They're pretty
think you
big.
could make that
I was just trying to
reference.
think about how much
Yeah.
food they could carry.
Because when Jesus was preaching, he said, "I am the bread of life,"
Yeah.
right? But he also
Symbolically, the
says-
bread is very.
I was kind of thinking
Important.
about like how humans are like imperfect and like they're full of sin and stuff like that. I was like thinking that God like meant we're the ravens and we're carrying his like word and stuff like that, which is the bread.
Sure, I think that sounds pretty accurate. And in that way, God can purify us, and we can be used for that purpose. I think that's a really good conclusion to draw from that. Absolutely. So some other important things. We got about 5 or 6 more minutes left in our study time. So another couple important things that we'll draw from this. The names are significant. That's great. But God says that He commanded a woman there to sustain him. Yet the woman doesn't seem aware of this command.
Yeah. Like you just think of somebody coming to you, like just
You're about to
somebody
starve
coming
to
you.
death.
Yeah, yeah. Like you're poor on the streets and like you're about to starve to death, and somebody's like, "Bring me food." Like imagine how confused you'll be. Like, bring me food. I need food.
Oh yeah, and especially when everyone is starving.
Yeah.
And she's a widow, which means she had a husband, and maybe he died because of this.
Maybe.
Right. I mean, it doesn't say that, but she's a widow, so she's alone. And back then, if you were a widow, it was almost like a death sentence, anyways, because the economy wasn't good for widows. If you didn't have a husband, you basically didn't have a livelihood.
Yeah, so like she was with her son. You're both
In most
starving,
cases.
and somebody just comes up to you and just asks for food.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean everyone's hungry, right?
Yeah,
You know, this time everyone's looking for food.
so like I can't imagine how like she'll feel about that. She'll be like, no, we are already starving. But like she'll probably be super confused. Because like, he has to know that everyone's starving too. Because
Oh, sure.
she was not aware of like how God chose her to help him.
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, so that's another really awesome point to bring out because you could totally understand why it would be a really weird situation.
Yeah. Everyone's starving, and this random man comes up to you and asks for food.
Yeah, so God says, Elijah, trust me, walk 80 miles, and there's going to be a woman there who will feed you and take care of you. You know, that's a pretty big, pretty tall order of trust that Elijah had to trust that there was something on the other side of this
Yeah.
village which Jezebel came from.
Yeah, and like imagine how Elijah felt at the time when like she was so confused about it too. You
Mhm.
could have thought like maybe it's the wrong person, or maybe just like he had it all wrong or something.
Sure. I mean, and maybe God had showed him specifically who it was. Hard to know. But God can work that out. He goes and he sees the woman. So he walks over there, verse 10. He goes to Zarephath, came to the gate of the city. So he's at like the entrance of the city and he sees her.
Mhm.
And she's gathering sticks. And he called to her and he said, fetch, I pray thee, a little water in a vessel that I may drink. So he's walked a long way and he says, hey, can you give me a little bit of water? And she doesn't seem to question it at all, even though she also has limited resources.
Yeah, she's probably like super confused, but
No, she knew. God told her that Elijah, you go.
I thought she didn't.
Okay.
But I thought
She
like
knew.
she didn't know.
You can
Yes.
read.
So it says in verse 9 that God commanded a woman
Yeah.
there.
Mm-hmm.
But
So God like told her like to be at that exact location, or
I don't know, because she was there getting everything ready to die.
Yeah.
She was ready to starve to death and just that be the end of it.
Have
So
their last meal.
what
I almost wondered too if the two sticks was like symbolized for like sharpening sticks to like end their lives if they didn't want to starve. I don't know if it would be like that.
No, she
dramatic,
said
but-
that it was she was going to dress them, which when I was Eric's age, I always thought she meant she was going to eat the sticks. but I don't know, because that's what it sounded like. Was she was like getting the sticks
well, I
ready to
thought
eat.
like before like right when you said she was collecting sticks, I just thought like
That'd be
maybe
nice.
for firewood or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you started talking about like how to use it for like cooking and stuff like that. I'm like, okay.
Oh
It
yeah.
could be used like for tools too.
And so I mean, what we'll probably do is we'll probably pick this up again next week as well to run through some extra stuff. But we'll go ahead and talk through some of the other cool things that are there worth mentioning. So he asks for water, and without question, she's going to get him water, which I think is very impressive.
in a drought.
And while she's walking away, he says, "Oh, and can you also bring me some bread?" Because he's assuming that God has provided, and so he's asking for the bread that he was basically promised from God. And she says, "Well, we don't have any bread yet, but I've got the flour and the oil, and it's only enough for me and my son to have one last meal, and then we're going to die."
So like Elijah asked for like a small bit though.
Yeah, he said a morsel. Yeah, so a morsel's like a tiny bit.
Yeah.
I
So
think if God didn't tell her before Elijah goes by,
I bet,
to
like-
feed him.
I bet like she wouldn't even do it.
Yeah, she wouldn't do that.
She'd be
Because
like,
she-
no, we're
that
already
she
about
didn't
done.
have enough for another person. But when she said, God told her, go and make a bread and give to my prophet. He's coming to you. I think when she said to him, oh, I have just 2 sticks and a little amount of flour and oil to make just a little bread for me and my son. I think she said that because maybe she was thinking, are you tell him that I have not enough for him. Maybe he can change his mind. And he said, okay, you can feed yourself and your son.
Well, not only
Don't
that-
worry about me. but God had a purpose.
I had like
Yeah,
prepared
right.
In her life,
for.
that she saw the miracle that Elijah made, God made for her, but she wasn't until that.
I bet like
The death of his son, she wasn't convinced about God enough. That's why his son died, and God used Elijah to bring him back to life because God was working in that woman heart.
I bet like she was like, what is a miracle going to do to for us, because like we're already about to die. So what's the point of a miracle if we're about to die? So she could have been like, she could have had that mindset too.
Sure, and I mean, just to think the whole story could have been different if instead of deciding to sacrifice what she had and to believe what Elijah says to her, she could have been selfish and said, "No, I'm sorry, this is our last meal."
Also, I think
And she could have sent him away.
I think the importance of the 2 sticks is that she didn't have enough to make a fire enough for it either.
Well, she obviously had enough to bake something.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think the fire was probably also sustained as well, because he talks about the cruise and the vessel not ever giving up, essentially.
That was conditional upon her offering Elijah the first piece
Yeah,
of bread.
exactly. I'm saying I think she didn't even have enough really fire to even do much more for anything else. Than one
Oh,
more
well,
It's
yeah,
gonna
they
be gone
baked the
for, like,
last piece, yeah.
A second, it's gonna be like just.
Maybe it wasn't even able to be baked all the way through. I don't know. Like,
That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm saying her fire was probably also provided to her because everything else was provided supernaturally. She had 2 sticks, and making a fire out of 2 sticks, unless that kind of like translates to logs.
well, like I said, the other phrase that's used is a couple. It's
Yeah.
interchangeable in
A
the
couple still
definition.
means 2.
Well,
Wait,
yeah,
but
but it
did
could
you-
also just be an expression, like how we would say, "Well, there's a couple
Well,
of books
that's a
over
Western expression. That's not necessarily an expression. A couple means 2.
there." Well,
A couple is like counting to 2.
Yeah.
But it also had some extra definitions as well
I
that I
think
was
God
looking at.
provided the sticks for her too, because everybody in the city was looking for sticks to cooking the.
Mhm.
The last bit.
That's what I'm saying. I think
Lost
that's
piece
why
of
it's
meal.
specific. Is that I think it's specific to 2 is because God had to provide even the fire to even
Yeah.
to do that as well.
Maybe it's not enough to make a lasanha,
To cook it.
to cook a bread, but falei assim, que eles podem ter durado tempo suficiente para assar. Porque
Wouldn't
Deus-
be hot enough to
lasted
make the
long
bread
enough.
firm.
That's what I was saying.
To bake it.
yeah,
That's what I was saying. I
God
was
made
Wait, Elijah,
maybe
did-
God made a miracle with the sticks too, because God is God.
I think that's why it's
Everything.
specific is that it's mentioning that it didn't have enough to make a fire, unless the sticks are like kind of like sticks, like they're like this kind of long. They're like
Well, I think it's another important thing too to think that, as I mentioned, this place was literally called the refiners or the refinery. So it's possible too that most of the wood around the area too
Burned.
had been used for whatever they were doing. Not only for people starving and trying to make sure they could bake stuff, but
probably
also
probably
from the
for
industry
cooking
itself.
everything or making charcoal and doing whatever else.
Everybody use madeira,
Yeah.
lenha,
Money?
Wood.
Oh,
wood
Oh.
for cooking.
hmm
And it was very
We had a lot of
hard to
forges,
find
a lot of-
some
Well,
piece
plus,
of wood
and plus
to
you
cook.
had up to this point maybe close to 3 years of drought, so nothing would have been growing tree-wise.
Mhm.
So whatever had been used was just gone, and it wasn't growing back. So
We can see God's hand in everything in Elijah's history.
So, didn't you say something about like she used some sticks to like do something with the bread?
no, I was just saying that when I was your age, I thought when I read this verse for the first time, she says,
No,
"Behold."
not eating the sticks. That's not what I meant. But like, didn't you say so? Like, didn't you guys like talk about like huge giant sticks and doing something with the bread and stuff or something like that?
No, I was saying unless the sticks that they're referring to are like small logs,
He
yeah.
was saying that maybe the word for stick is actually the word for like a small tree.
Well, I mean, because you
limb.
can have like branches that are like this big around,
Yeah.
and that's still like a stick. It's
Yeah,
just
we picture a stick being like a little thin thing like this,
yeah.
but maybe they were like
But
small
I
tree
imagine
branches.
like old
I
English.
imagined it was actually like a stick.
Well,
like a
plus she
small
was
stick.
outside of the city looking for this stuff.
I think it doesn't
So-
matter
What does he have, the
the
entrance
size
though?
of the stick. What matters is
Is that
to
point is two
know
sticks.
that God provides for her what she need for her necessity.
Well, that, and I mean, this could be somewhat unrelated, but I also had a thought of the possible prophetic implications, especially relating to the next part. So maybe next week we'll bring that out because that would be worth talking about more. Is the two sticks and the miracle of the food constantly being, like, just imagine, like, you got a container, you dip
it's
in,
like the
it's
barrel,
empty, you pull out a whole bunch of flour, like, you could probably dump it out and then immediately get another full thing. So I mean, it was a miracle that God continued to create food.
Reminds me of the fish. Jesus multiplied.
Yeah. But it's because she was faithful. And if she wasn't faithful, and if she didn't do as God had impressed her to do, then it wouldn't have happened.
Well, then they would have had their last meal and died.
They would have had their last meal and died. But then also, just the fact that Elijah had been fed by ravens for the past however long, at least more than a year, I would assume, was preparing him for this whole thing where he was literally going to be living with a Gentile family and sharing a house with them and sharing food with them and breaking bread, which was basically forbidden for Jews and Gentiles to do together. You were not allowed to eat together.
Yeah.
Or even touch them.
Yeah. I mean, without having some purification ceremony.
You had to have like 7 days of quarantine, and that's an interesting topic too.
You weren't even allowed to have those touching.
It's interesting too to have like the 7 days of cleansing and stuff and uncleanness and.
So we got through 1.5 parts of the story of Elijah. There's a lot more interesting, significant things that I think we can draw next Sabbath, but for now, we'll conclude and we'll enjoy our meal together here, where the oil and the flour never fails sometimes. All right, so we'll go ahead and pray and close it out then. Father, we thank you so much. Thank you for these lessons that you've left for us and for all the ways that you strengthen us and empower us. And God, we want to demonstrate that same faith that you had Elijah demonstrate in trusting that wherever he went, you would provide. And so we thank you for your provisions here on earth as we enjoy a meal together. And we thank you for the provision of your spiritual word here that we were able to enjoy and kind of take apart together. We look forward to doing this every Sabbath, and especially in the Sabbath on the earth made new. We love you, and we look forward to when you're coming home to get us and when we can be taken back to you. And love you, and we praise you.